Welcome to the Compliance 911 Show, a no-nonsense podcast discussing hot topics for today's busy compliance professional. It's everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but we're afraid to ask. And now, here are your hosts, Dean Stockford of M&M Consulting and Len Susio of GeoDataVision.
Here we are today for another regulatory compliance podcast. What interesting topic did you bring to the audience, Len?
Well, Dean, there's so much discussion and confusion and concern about the simultaneous implementation of the new 2023 CRA rule and the Section 1071 rule over the next 2 years. So I thought it would be very helpful for our listeners for us to discuss what they should be doing to handle the enormous changes scheduled to take place starting at the beginning of next year, only a few months from when we're recording this podcast.
Yeah, thank God we're headed into winter because it is a very hot topic in a very hot area. So I need to cool down a little bit from all of this. But it sounds like a topic that will be great interest of certainly our audience that are involved more specifically in regulatory compliance. But it also sounds, quite daunting and it's quite a bit to unpack. So can we get it all done during the next 15 minutes or so?
Well, if we speed up the recording, maybe we can do that. But so we won't be able to get it all in the next 15 minutes of discussion, but we can get a good start, and maybe we can conduct a few more follow-up discussions in future podcasts about this.
Oh, that sounds like a plan. So where do we start, Len?
Well, one of the complications that we are dealing with the phase out of the legacy CRA rule and its replacement by the new 2023 CRA rule. Simultaneously, the totally new Section 1071 rule would be phased in as well. And keep in mind that these are totally different regulations, but they are interrelated rules. In fact, Section 1071 reported data is scheduled to be eventually replaced the small business lending activity currently captured and reported under the current CRA and under the new 2023 CRA.
Okay, so I am going to ask a question and then ask a question. But my first thing, and you probably have this addressed somewhere or you're planning to address it somewhere, but is the litigation that's occurring within CRA, does that impact us at all? Or is that something we're going to get to later on, Len?
Well, litigation is certainly a factor because both the new CRA rule and Section 1071 are being litigated. It remains to be seen exactly where the courts will end up.
Okay.
At this point in time, the new CRA rule, there's been an injunction or a stay issued by the court regarding its implementation. And there had been an injunction on Section 1071 related to the constitutionality of the CFPB's funding. That the CFPB passed. But nevertheless, Section 1071 is still being contested largely because it's so expansive. It's way beyond the contents that are specified in Dodd-Frank, which is where Section 1071 emanates from.
Okay.
So, I would say to our listeners, we have to plan for the fact that these rules will be implemented as currently scheduled, although there's certainly a possibility that court action may delay their implementation. But there's such big changes coming down the pike, it pays to get the ball rolling now.
Yeah, and I'll be quiet. I'll let you lead the way. And how do you recommend that compliance officers prepare under these complicated circumstances that you're presenting today? So fire away, Len.
Okay, well, the first effective date, or maybe I should use the term applicable date, as used in the regulations for the new rules, is July 18th of 2025. That's for data collection and reporting for Tier 1 reporters under the new Section 1071 rule. So let's begin there. Section 1071 breaks reporters into three groups. For Tier 1 lenders, which are lenders that do greater than 2,500 small business loan originations annually, the Section 1071 rule is scheduled to commence on July 18, 2025, when data collection is required to commence. This is ahead of the first effective date for the new CRA, the 2023 CRA, which is scheduled to become applicable on January 1st of 2026. So let's begin with Section 1071 preparation. Tier 2 lenders, incidentally, will commence data collection as scheduled on January 16th of 2026 And Tier 3 will commence on October 18th of 2026. Tier 2, by the way, are lenders that are doing 500 to less than 2,500 annual originations. And Tier 3 are lenders that are doing a minimum of 100 up to 500 annual originations of small business loans. The very first thing a compliance officer should do is to implement a system of collecting the data that would determine if you are a covered reporter and what tier you would fall into. Compliance officers should already have started collecting data for 2023 and 2024 for any commercial loans extended to businesses with gross annual revenues of $5 million or less. This applies no matter the size of the loan, unlike the current CRA, under which a small business loan is based on the loan size of $1 million or less. The collection of this data is imperative now so that you can determine the volume meaning the counts, not the dollar value, of the qualified small business loans that you are making for each year, and then compare that to the annual volume of the tier thresholds, which I just explained was 2,500 for tier 1, 500 for tier 2, and 100 for tier 3. The original rule used the years 22 and 23 for data, but since the determining factor is loan volume in the previous 2 calendar years and the implementation dates have been delayed, it's appropriate to look at the 2 calendar years prior to your potentially qualifying as a covered lender. This means the years 23 and 24 for potential tier 1 lenders and the years 24 and 25 for potential tiers 2 and tier 3 lenders. Keep in mind that at this stage, you don't have to collect any of the 81 fields of data you will need to collect once you become a covered lender. All you need to do now is to identify and compile the transactions that will potentially qualify as small business loans and determine when and if you become a covered lender.
Yeah, and if I understand what you're saying correctly, it sounds like even if you're a non-covered lender, you must have some sort of system of collecting commercial loans and determining the small business status. You have to first determine whether you're a covered lender. And so I would say even if you haven't made that determination yet, whether you're covered, non-covered, you still have to have some sort of system in place to look at that. Is that correct?
Absolutely, that's correct. I mean, that's one of the implications of Section 1071. Even non-covered lenders have to have some means of collecting data that would determine if and when they do become a covered lender. So this responsibility to identify and collect and compile small business loans applies to any small business lender, even non-covered lenders, because you can't possibly know if you're a covered lender if you don't keep the data that's used for that determination.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is really important. So I hope our listeners are listening closely. So even non-covered lenders after 1071 is effective will need to maintain a system that will allow them to determine when and if they become a covered lender. Now, of course, if you do far less than 100 small business loans annually, then collection of the transaction data may not be necessary. But if your institution does any reasonable volume of small business loans that could approach 100 per year, you will need to be on your toes, even if you are not a covered lender. And that means you need to collect the minimal data prior to becoming a covered lender.
Okay, so the first step is to have this system in place to identify, collect, and compile counts, on the number of small business loans originated annually. And this would be necessary even if they're not a covered lender, but have a realistic potential of qualifying as a covered lender. And you've referred to 3 different tiers of lenders. So can you kind of explain how that comes about?
Yes, because that's
about? I guess,
you're right. It's particularly relevant now, Dean.
Yeah.
It won't be relevant after 1071 is fully implemented because you're either a covered lender or not. But during this transition period, that's when these tiers are important. So the 3 different tiers of lenders are relevant only for the phase-in period of the new Section 1071 rule, because the tiers determine when your data collection and responsibilities begin. I mentioned these implementation dates earlier. So once 1071 is fully phased in beginning on January 1st, 2027, the tiers will be irrelevant after that date, because after that date, you either are or you aren't a covered lender. At that time, covered lenders will be determined annually based on if a lender originated 100 or more small business loans in each of the 2 previous calendar years. So the tiers are relevant only for the phase-in period, which is, of course, the period of time that we're in right now. So it's imperative that everyone listening to this podcast be on their toes and have a system to collect the data that potentially could trigger them being a covered lender.
Okay, so we've gone through, we've determined we are a covered lender. What are we responsible for doing?
Okay, well, this is another thing about Section 1071 everyone should understand. Section 1071 is a reporting regulation, much like HMDA is a reporting regulation. The only performance required under both Section 1071 and HMDA is the collection, scrubbing, and timely reporting of the complete data to be collected. Section 1071 does not have any performance criteria other than the complete collection and timely reporting of the mandated data. This is different from the Community Reinvestment Act, which currently requires, one, that data collection be to which the collection of data to which benchmarks are applied, and two, lending performance tests to determine if a bank is fulfilling its CRA responsibility to meet the community's need for credit services. So CRA is both a reporting and a performance regulation, whereas Section 1071 is only a reporting regulation.
So once Section 1071 data is being reported, will reporting under CRA be eliminated?
You know what, Dean? That's a good question, and it's an area that I'm certain is ripe for confusion. Once Section 1071 is fully implemented and reporting for all institutions for an entire year is being done, the prudential bank regulators will phase out the reporting of the small business and small farm lending data under the legacy CRA rule and the new 2023 CRA rule. The first full year for which all covered lenders are scheduled to report is the calendar year 2027, which will be reported in 2028. This means it is likely that mandated reporters under CRA will need to collect and report small business lending activity under both the new 2023 CRA rule and Section 1071 through 2027. This has the potential to become very confusing because each regulation has a different definition of what a small business loan is, and the data to be captured under each regulation is radically different. And adding to the potential confusion is that the community development activity will not be captured and reported under Section 1071. It will continue to be reported under the legacy and the new CRA rule. So a consequence of this is that community development lending and investing will continue to be required to be reported under the new CRA rule. In fact, the new CRA rule will require much more information about a bank's community development activities, such as geocoding the community development loans and investments and reporting the community development purpose fulfilled by each loan, community development loan or investment. So you can see, Dean, I believe there's going to be a lot of confusion since a lot of institutions are going to be collecting and reporting data under 1071 and simultaneously under the new CRA rule. And what they're collecting is going to be radically different, and what the definition of a small business loan is very different as well.
Yeah, and once a lender becomes a covered lender, I guess I'm still kind of wondering what their responsibilities under 1071. I know it's data collection, but is there any? Is there more?
Oh yeah, there's always more when it comes to regulation. So this is where the burden becomes really much more onerous. The new Section 1071 rule has potentially 81 fields of data to be reported. There's about a dozen in the current CRA rule. But before you can do that, the very first thing a bank must do is to determine if a loan is a small business loan and qualifies to be reported under Section 1071. That determination is based solely on the gross annual revenue of the borrower. So once you start reporting activity under Section 1071, it will be absolutely imperative. I will repeat, it's absolutely imperative that the very first thing to be determined for any business loan application is whether the borrower is a small business or not. If the borrower is not a small business loan, is determined by the $5 million gross annual revenue limit, you simply stop collecting any more data mandated by Section 1071. In fact, it would be illegal to proceed to ask the so-called protected demographic data, end quote, which would be required to be asked if the loan is qualified as a small business loan. We recommend that a small business qualification section be developed and incorporated in a standard commercial loan application. At the very top, by the way, and a file be maintained on all applications determined to not qualify as small business loan applications, so that you can show examiners that all business applications are screened to determine if they are reportable under Section 1071.
Well, it sounds like you've now reached the point of collecting all the data required under Section 1071. Am I correct on that?
Yes, you are correct, Dean. And that complicated requirement is a topic for another day. There are, in fact, maybe a few more days and a few more podcasts. There are lots of potential pitfalls in the data collection under Section 1071.
Yeah, and I'm certain our audience appreciates this discussion about the 1071 basic and look forward to the more information that comes out relative to this topic as well as the CRA topic. And then, I would be remiss if I didn't mention also the politics behind it, because we're, as we know, we're voting next week, or some may have already voted, but, depending on the administration, this could be derailed. So back to the drawing board again. It just continues to happen, it seems like. But in any way, I thank you, Len. This was certainly timely. It was a great presentation. I'm Dean Stockford from M&M Consulting.
And I am Len Susio of GeoDataVision LLC, saying we hope you enjoyed today's podcast and found it informative. We look forward to a continued presentation of this very important topic in future podcasts, and we encourage you to let us know topics you would like us to address in future podcasts.
Thanks for listening to the Compliance 911 Show. If you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. While you're at it, please give us a like and review to help others find the show. As always, links are in the show notes, and you can always find us online at compliance911show.com. Follow M&M Consulting and GeoDataVision on LinkedIn for all the latest news and information on compliance hot topics.